Twitter have spoken quite a bit about the SES, the Senior Executive Service, and there's been some degree of back and forth through YouTube with regard to exactly what the purpose and intention of that SES group is. Some people have said they feel it's just a pay grade, but of course you and others have been adamant that it is a subversive organization that was created by or largely advanced by Christine Marcy, Field's sister, who it's universally agreed is certainly one of the most evil women in the world. She created the JPATS, prisoner transport system, and the Small Business Administration. Of course, later today, when you and I get our Patreon stream underway.
Oh dear. Enjoy your coffee. I am. Well, I was going to start this video off and I was going to call it hypocrisy. Then I decided Pravda, because this is about truth, is it not? Being subjective and who it might be and who it isn't being or whatever. A subjective truth. So I have a question now, and it's directed not to Mr. Goodman, who has, you heard with your own ears, unequivocally, that was Mr. Goodman. The reason why this is on the screenshot is from the YouTube. It is a public domain, cannot be struck. You heard Mr. Goodman himself state quite clearly that Christine Marcy created JPATS. Mr. Goodman also is one of these people that demands evidence. Rightly so, you should have evidence. So I am going to demand Mr. Goodman prove that Christine Marcy created JPATS. Meanwhile, I'm going to give you evidence in a minute to the man who did. I'm going to give you a name. But also, I'm going to be calling out Mr. Stranahan and Mr. Payne from True Pundit regarding the fact that you are investigative journalists, so you should be able to help Mr. Goodman piece together the facts. You should be able to prove what Mr. Hawkins and Mr. McConnell have been saying about the Senior Executive Service being created by Christine Marcy, or all the evidence that I've put up is correct. So I openly challenge these two gentlemen. Not that they'll bother, because they haven't got the courage or the guts to do so, or they're too busy being under the thumb of one little tyrant. But I digress. So we now know about that. So let's go to the documentation. We have a name here, Stanley E. Morris. Now I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey here so you understand what it's all about. So if you take this down a second, and we get to page 31 and 32 where we were yesterday, which talks about how this all came about. And there's a reason why, because dates and times matter. So we have now proven beyond any shadow of doubt that Christine Marcy did not create the Senior Executive Service. She was not involved with the Asset and Forfeiture Fund, that was Congress, and we've also proved that she did not create a database for the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children. That was the FBI under the bequest of John Walsh, the father of the murdered child Adam Walsh, which is where it all comes about, i.e. Adam's Law. So we've now proven all that beyond any doubt directly. So I've shown that not only, but I've also the other stuff I've proven to Hawkins over the times of all his other lies, but these ones we are doing together. So here we have it, page 35. Sorry, page 32. In 1985, the U.S. Marshal Service acquired a B-727-100 jet to replace the smaller Convair 580, valued at over $4.5 million. The jet was obtained by the U.S. Marshal Service at no cost through the Government Surplus Property Program. Now remember that. If you don't, bookmark this time and come back to it, or pull up the page and double check about what I am about to show you. But first of all, let's talk about I'm sorry, I have a horrible cold at the moment. U.S. Marshals. Here we have history list of the U.S. Marshal Service directors and predecessors. And there you have Stanley E. Morris. Before him was William Hall. 1983 to 1989, he was the director of the U.S. Marshal Service. So he was the top guy. He was the head honcho. We have another piece of documentation here for your perusal, which is talking about the Frontier Marshal. And here it talks about former Marshal Service Director Stanley E. Morris said in 1986, the sculpture thus seems a fitting symbol of the dedication of marshals and their deputies during those 2 centuries. So it talks about this thing. So there's an article there for you to peruse. But this one is the UPI Stanley E. Morris, a top Justice Department official, was. That's the title of the documentation, so we shall go through it quickly now. Washington, Stanley E. Morris, a top Justice Department official, was sworn in Tuesday as Director of the U.S. Marshals Service. Morris, 41, replaces William Hall. Go back to the documents. Well, let's do that now. So we now know that tallies with that. William Hall, Stanley Morris. So we know it ties together. Stanley Morris, we have a bio here of a book which talks about him and where he worked. So he was federal government in Washington, D.C. He directed operational planning at the then Department of the Health and Education and Welfare. Later, served in the White House Office of Management and Budget, the U.S. Department of Justice, the White House Drug Office, and the U.S. Department of Treasury. Morris was director of the U.S. Marshal Service under President Reagan, in charge of anti-money laundering policy and intelligence in the Clinton administration, and later was chief of staff at the ICPO Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France. He currently resides in Lyon and Pizzola Valley, Usono, Italy. Isn't that interesting? But does it say that he created the planes? He didn't create prison transportation of the planes. Oh, you're not showing us anything. Ah, patience. Patience is beautiful. Here we have another document for your perusal, which talks about National Prison Transportation System, including the acquisition of own aircraft, accepted responsibility of building security of federal courthouses. This one is the statement of Stanley E. Morris, Director of U.S. Marshal Service, accompanied by Howard Safir, Associate Director for Operations. But it's still not showing us who formed Con Air. Now remember, we have Mr. Goodman and Mr. Hawkins. It's Mr. Hawkins of all people. And if you listen to the beginning of the other video of JPATS, you actually hear Hawkins rotor-coercing McConnell into the same thing about his sister. So it's like repeating the memory. So also hearing that Mr. McConnell has finally now got a lawyer, and that's good news, because we want fair and honest justice, but it's also a message for his son. If he wants to know who's behind his father's craziness, it's David Charles Hawkins, and I've been proving that. So if somebody knows his son or can point him in the right direction to my site, please do, so he could go through it. And if he wishes to contact me, he can do. And I have a Twitter page. So if he wishes to contact me, my Twitter handle is GRZYBO, Zibov, which means mushroom in Polish. And that is my Twitter handle. For anybody that wishes to contact me or follow me there, you can do. It's not very exciting on there, but you can send me a private message. And if his son is willing to do so, because I'm willing to talk to him with the evidence I have. But getting back to JPATS. Well, what do we have here? we have the Oklahoman. U.S. Marshals get new Boeing 727. Oh. At first glance, the Boeing 727 sitting on the runway at Will Rogers World Airport looks like any other jet that flies into Oklahoma City. But the passengers wear handcuffs and shackles. Their final destinations are not vacation spots, but courtrooms and prisons. The 727 is the newest and largest addition to the tiny air fleet the U.S. Marshals Service uses to transport federal prisoners to court dates and penitentiaries around the country. But what is written? This was written on the 12th of November 1985 by Judy Gibbs. I will link it below. You can read it for yourself, but let's carry on a bit further into this article because it gets more and more revealing. Its addition means big savings for the Marshal Service, officials say. It's a lot cheaper. I don't think anyone's mentioned it. And I've said it time and time again. It's cost effective for the taxpayer, said U.S. Marshal Stuart Ernest of Oklahoma City, where the plane is based. It costs the Marshals Service $199.94 on average to transport a prisoner on the 727, compared to $697 for a commercial flight or $897 for a charter flight. But then it's hard to transport prisoners of commercial flights. It's not very attractive to us because they want us to take their handcuffs off, and we're not very attractive to them as customers, says Charles Cohen. I want you to remember this, Em. I've highlighted this for a reason. It'll all become apparent. Chief Inspector with the Prisoner Transportation Division of the Marshal Service in Kansas City. Inside and out, it looks like any Boeing 727 you might take it on a commercial flight. The seating is all the same, and our passengers all wear jewellery, said John Wetmore, supervisor in the Seattle Marshal's office. In fact, the 727 was built for commercial use. Cohen, i.e. Charles Cohen, said Boeing built the plane for Eastern Airlines. Now, I want everyone to pin your ears back now, people. I'm now going to give you evidence which shows it wasn't Christine Marcy. I'm going to give you it right now. So let's read further. Cohen said Boeing built the plane for Eastern Airlines in the late 1960s, but the Federal Aviation Administration bought it from Eastern as soon as it was off the assembly line. The FAA used the plane for pilot training until it was turned over recently to the General Service Administration as surplus property. Well, just go back there, surplus property. To place a smaller Convair value 4.5 jet office cost. It was obtained by the U.S. Marshal Service at no cost through the government's surplus property program. Let's carry on with the article. Which we made it available for free to other federal agencies. The Marshal Service wasn't alone in wanting it. The Immigration and Naturalization Service and the military also had eyes on the Boeing 727. Cohen said, I persuaded the GSA, did you hear that? I persuaded the GSA that our need was greater, he said. 3 weeks ago, the 727 went into prisoner transport business. It flies 5 days a week. So now we have a name. Cohen. Charles Cohen. I'll carry on with this. The plane has 83 seats compared to 50 on the Convair 580 the Marshal Service has been using under contract until now. The plane will be used as a backup for the 727, Cohen said. The only other planes in the Marshal Service fleet are some small planes acquired through government seizure, for instance planes being used to transport drugs, he said. Within the next 3 weeks, Cohen said, the 727's vinyl double seats will be pulled out and replaced with triple seating. That will jump the the plane's capacity to 109. We're delighted with it. It takes care of all our capacity requirements, Cohen said. That is the Oklahoman, and it was, like I said, written in 1985. I will link it below. You can read for yourself. Now you know who created Con Air. His name was Charles Cohen, and he was the prisoner. Let's go back to what his title. He was the chief inspector with the Prison Transportation Division. That is the guy that created Con Air, not Christine Marcy. The guy that oversaw the US Marshals at the time was Stanley E. Morris. And also, the plane came from government surplus, did not come from asset and forfeiture. The first asset and forfeiture was in 1986. In 1985, they got it from government surplus. You can read it all for yourself. The evidence is clear. Now, this is my challenge to the so-called investigative journalists who won't do a thing because they're yellow journalists or cowards, and they will back this guy up by proving me wrong. Give me evidence that Christine Marcy done all this. Because there's none. Zip. Nada. And not only have I destroyed all the narrative, I've exposed every single lie that Hawkins and McConnell have been pushing. But more to the point, the person that created all this, who has admitted to it, I've given you evidence verbally in his own words, was Hawkins. He is now completely discredited. He is pointless. So why is Mr. Goodman still employing his services, shall we say, on his channel, obtaining money by deception and fraud? Because it is obvious that Mr. Hawkins does not know or cannot research properly. Because if he did, he would have found this information. If I can find it, anybody else can find it. And considering he classes me as the bad guy, a B researcher, or the tattoo clown, or the blob, not looking good for him, really, is it? But more importantly is Mr. Goodman and his duplicity and his hypocrisy. So, upon that note, like I keep saying, it's time for all these people. Oh, and one other name. Another name. And I'm sorry to do this, but Mr. Hagman, you validated Mr. Hawkins as being credible. So, Mr. Hagman, could you please validate what I'm saying is correct or incorrect? Can you prove that Christine Marcy did that, and can you give me the documentation? Because I can find none nowhere. Everything I am finding, I can validate the evidence with. So I want somebody somewhere to give me actual proof, government documentation to prove that Christine Marcy did any of this that Hawkins created. And I'm sorry, Mr. Hagman, but you did validate him on one of your videos. I'm not bothering with people like Titus Frost or Project Comelot or Victorious Libertas, because to me they're buffoons. What I'm asking are genuine people that are supposed to be researchers and credible people. So a lot of people are going to probably thumbs down this video. I don't care. It's about the facts and the truth. And like I said, and I'll say at the end of this also, is if Mr. McConnell's son wants to contact me, he is more than welcome to. Because, like I keep saying, I believe his father is mentally ill. He was taken advantage of by these people. I believe he has some form of dementia or possibly an Alzheimer's or something to do with short-term memory problems. It's obvious when you start looking at all the back videos where you go through it all. So upon that note, I'm going to give this message out again. It's time for these people to pay the piper.